Ever since iPhones adopted this Pro branding for their most expensive models having the best features, Apple really hasn't changed their design except few tweaks here and there. And it got increasingly harder to tell the difference between generations of iPhone. They have had this 3-camera module design on their back starting from iPhone 11 Pro, and now we are 4 generations later at iPhone 15s with arguably the same design except the addition of dynamic island from iPhone 14 Pros. So keeping these obvious facts aside, I want to cover a few things that has really changed both internally and externally on this year's iPhone 15 Pro, because I think we all buy phones not just for the initial user experience or look, but as a device that you're gonna use on a day-to-day. So starting with the performance. The iPhone 15 Pro gets the A17 Pro chip, the latest and greatest Apple Silicon, compared to the non-Pro iPhone 15s still get last year's A16 Bionic chip. This is the first year Apple has called one of their chips Pro. On a day-to-day use, you won't really notice the difference because iPhones are generally really snappy, but Apple says the chip has a new 6-core GPU design that can handle ray tracing, an advanced kind of graphics computation previously limited to high-end gaming cards that essentially simulates light. It also got a better neural engine for running artificial intelligence. It's really the demanding games that can take advantage of this. So if you were a pro gamer or someone who's really gaming on your phones, this year's iPhone can handle much more of that. But for most people, what this means is your phone is gonna get that extra 1 or 2 years of software update. Design. Like we said, it's hard to tell the difference between an iPhone 15 Pro versus last year's Pro iPhones. It still has the 6.7-inch screen and flat edge form factor, same as the iPhone 14 Pro models. But even though the 15 Pro looks visually the same from a distance, this year's iPhone has the most change exterior-wise compared to all the iPhones in the previous years. The most visible and welcome change this year is the titanium framing. So the iPhone 15 Pro has titanium for the exterior frame instead of stainless steel. The new color, natural titanium, shows off this new metal really well, but with most other colors, it isn't as immediately noticeable. Titanium is a huge upgrade for daily use because it makes the phone lighter, it feels better in the hand. Apple's Pro phones have been getting heavier since 2019, but this phone reverses the trend. Apple says that 6-inch iPhone 15 Pro is 187 grams or 9% lighter than last year's model. The iPhone 15 Pro Max with a bigger 6.7-inch screen weighs 8% less, but in practice it feels like an even bigger reduction. If you hold an iPhone 14 Pro, it feels like a brick. The weight difference between this year's Pro iPhones and last year's is noticeable even with a case. And the titanium alloy framework withstands drop better, so this year I am less paranoid about dropping this phone while using without a case. And truth be told, it also looks and feels better for a premium device. Display. Not only are this year's iPhones lighter, but they are slightly narrower and shorter in length, even though they're marginally thicker compared to last year's Pro iPhones. And they also have a smaller sized bezel with the same size screen, and it's noticeable when holding two devices side by side. But this also means last year's cases won't work with this year's iPhones. And 6.7-inch OLED display reaching a max 1200 nits brightness and 2400 nits for HDR content. Honestly, tough to say major quality improvement from iPhone 14s. It also has ever so slightly better pixel density, making consuming videos, games and images a tad crisper. Vibrant colors, inky blacks and excellent brightness contrast ratio makes this best-in-class screen. While the infamous notch still houses Face ID components, it's 20% shorter, enabling extra menu space. All of these are nice to have features, none of these are revolutionary. Camera. It's been the trend past couple of years with every Pro iPhone. The only reason for you to upgrade might be the camera. It's not like past year's iPhone 14 Pro had bad camera. In fact, this year's 15 Pro has the exact sensor as last year's 14 Pro, with the primary camera getting 48 megapixel accompanied by 12 megapixel ultra wide and a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. But with every iPhone release, there are some key features that gets added to the camera app that takes everyone's interest. So these are the few changes that I noticed on this year's camera. Number 1, 48 megapixel HEIF photos. While the 14 Pro can technically take 48 megapixel raw pictures, they weren't very usable. We were only able to take these pictures in ProRes RAW file format, and these file formats were very hard to handle, and getting them off the phone was a pain. So the iPhone 15 Pro features 48 megapixel HEIF files. HEIF files are compressed, so they don't offer the same benefits as RAW files when it comes to exposure adjustments in post. However, HEIF images are smaller in file size, and Apple hasn't made them difficult to get off your phone like ProRes files. And you have access to more usable high resolution images. If you're not editing your iPhone images, this is great. To enable HEIF 48 megapixel images, open the Settings app and tap Camera. Now select Formats, tap High Efficiency at the top. Scroll down and toggle on ProRAW and Resolution Control, then tap ProRAW Default. Now tap HEIF Max, then open Camera app and tap HEIF Max at the top. Number 2, change focus point after you shoot. You can now take a picture and then change the focus of your subject. You know sometimes how you take a picture and your subject is out of focus, but now the new iPhones has this feature where you could change the focus point of your subject once you have taken the picture. Personally, I'm not really a fan of this feature because when you take a picture using a camera, a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, the focus blur you get from the subject and the foreground is usually mechanical, meaning the aperture of the lens. The aperture of the lens decides how much depth of field is there between the subject and the foreground, but this is more of a software feature. But one thing to say here is the artificial blur the software produces has gotten a lot more better compared to previous years. To use this feature, tap the F button in the camera app and take a photo. Now open the image editor and tap the screen where you would like to change the focus to. Scroll the F dial to change the depth of field. Number 3, swap default primary focal length. So the iPhone 15 Pro has the option to set a default focal length on your primary camera lens. So what this means is your primary lens can default to either 24mm, 28mm or 35mm. I don't agree with the wording here, lenses, because these are not technically lenses. This is still the primary lens that has the 48 megapixel sensor, and instead of swapping lenses, this is just a sensor crop. So when you switch from 24mm to 28mm, it just crops up the sensor so you get the zoom in effect. I'm a fan of wide angle lenses, so I chose my default to be always 24mm, but maybe you like much more cropped in look, maybe a 35 or a 28, so you can always default to that in settings. So in order to set your default focal length, open the Settings app and tap Camera. Now scroll down and tap Main Camera. Ensure both of the top 2 toggles are green and then select a focal length at the bottom. Number 4, Zoom Context Panel. The Pro models has 1x, 2x, 3x and the Pro Max getting a 5x optical zoom, and with sensor shift optical stabilization at all these focal lengths, the clarity is much more higher. And there is this small feature that I noticed which shows the attention to detail. The iPhone's telephoto lens has a pretty long digital zoom which is at 15x. So naturally at long zooms like that, it's easy to get a little disoriented as to where you have zoomed into in relation to your original framing. It can be especially disorienting if you have zoomed into a wrong bit, or if you have moved the camera and are trying to figure out where in frame you have ended up. With the iPhone 15 Pro, Apple has given users a zoom context panel, which is essentially a small window showing the whole image with a yellow box denoting where you have zoomed in from frame. Pretty handy. To enable this feature, simply zoom into a photo by pinching out on the screen. Once you get past 8x zoom, you will see context panel pop up on the right. Number 5, ProRes videos with log. This is hands down my favorite feature on the new iPhone 15 Pro. Now you can shoot videos in low color profile using ProRes. What it basically means is you can shoot high quality videos with maximum dynamic range and saving all those color details. ProRes is a video codec created by Apple in 2007 that has been widely adopted by video and cinema professionals. ProRes files captures more data when shooting, resulting in better quality footage than you would typically get from a phone or even some dedicated cameras. And log is a color profile found on some professional video cameras and which is now available on iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. Log footage preserves the color information like highlights and shadows, which helps you in post-production to play with exposure and contrast. Actually, the video that you're watching right now is shot on a mirrorless Sony camera in low color profile, mainly because of the fact that I have more room to color grade after in post-production. So now you can have that same capability using your iPhone, meaning this gives you the freedom to mix and match your footage from your phone and camera without even breaking anything. On this topic, one new feature the iPhone 15 Pro has is the ability to shoot spatial video. Spatial video feature lets you to shoot video in a three-dimensional manner. Apple is really catering this towards their new Apple Vision Pro, but the latest Quest 3 also supports Apple's spatial videos. USB-C. Apple has a new charging port in over a decade now. So finally, Apple switched to USB-C. Not because they decided to, but there was an EU regulation that they have to abide by. So finally now you could use all your multi-purpose USB-C cable that you use to charge your headphones, keyboards, mouse to charge your iPhone. The port change on the iPhone also opens up some cool new abilities. For example, if you have a USB-C monitor dock, you can now likely plug your phone into a monitor which mirrors what's on your phone screen for presentations or perhaps to watch a movie or play a game. This was possible before with a dongle, but now anyone with a new iPhone and recent monitor dock can do it. And USB-C combined with the ProRes capability of new iPhones to shoot videos, I have seen some creators shooting videos straight to their external hard disks. Action button. The other major physical change this year's iPhone has is the action button. So the action button has replaced the previous sliders for muting and unmuting your phone. 90% of the people were always leaving their phone in mute, and you have a lot of software options to mute or unmute your phone. So the slider was somewhat redundant. Now with the new action button, you can map it to whatever feature you want. I have found myself having to unlock my phone going into the podcast app and playing something. So now I just have it mapped, so I just long presses it and it automatically opens up my podcast. But I have also seen some other cool use cases where people map it to a translate app, so you could translate whatever foreign language someone is speaking in real time. The iPhone 15 Pro is one of the best upgrades for Apple's high-end phones in a long time, even though the underlying core of what an iPhone does hasn't changed that much. So if you're upgrading from an older phone, any iPhone would do the job. But my personal opinion is that if you're upgrading from anything 12 Pro or earlier, this is the year that you should upgrade. With the titanium framing, the phone is much more light and compact. Added with the USB-C, I think this is the best year to upgrade to the latest iPhone.